This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language. It's 52 leaves, 102 pages, carefully preserved.
The Ethiopian Bible contains information about Jesus that has never been revealed, or perhaps it was simply not allowed to be revealed. Have you ever wondered if the image of Jesus we've been shown since childhood is truly complete? If the Jesus we know, the serene face of Renaissance paintings, the soft eyes, the forgiving, gentle nature, is only a part of it, then where did the rest go? And if the original Christ wasn't like that, then who changed the story? And the most frightening thing is that there are reports of a version that was suppressed for nearly 1,700 years. A version that depicts not just a human being, but something vast, cosmic, and beyond our understanding. Now, this is where a name emerges. Mel Gibson, the same director who made The Passion of the Christ. Gibson has openly stated that the resurrection was no simple scene. It was a cosmic event, an event that shook not just humanity, but the very structure of reality. And to truly understand Christ, you have to look beyond time and space, to places ordinary people don't even think about, the fissures between heaven and earth, and that other world that many find uncomfortable to even speak of. What almost no one realizes is that this vision already exists, not in Hollywood, not in Rome. It was recorded by monks living in the mountains of Ethiopia more than 1,700 years ago. Within its pages lies a description of Jesus so vivid, so powerful, and so different from the image most of us grew up with, one that Western Christianity has quietly cast aside. They don't want you to know the truth, and if it turns out to be true, it could change your perspective on Jesus forever. So stay tuned to the end of the video, because the connections revealed at the end will shake your mind. If you want to see videos filled with such truth, subscribe to the channel. One subscription could change everything for us. Now let's ask a very basic question. Is the Bible most people read today the complete story? The Bible that most Christians in the Western world know has a fixed number of books. The Protestant tradition recognizes 66 books, while the Catholic tradition recognizes 73. From childhood, people are taught that this is the entire Scripture. Nothing added, nothing removed. But when you look at a different part of the world, Ethiopia, the story suddenly changes. The Bible there contains 81 books, and some older traditions believe this number to be as high as 88. Consider this. This is no small difference. This is a whole slew of additional books, texts that simply don't exist in the Western Bible. These books were preserved for centuries in an ancient language called Ge'ez. Ge'ez was not just a language, but a sacred medium in which Ethiopian religious traditions were written and preserved. Significantly, the Ethiopian Church is one of the oldest surviving Christian traditions in the world, so old that it was established here even before many parts of Europe became Christian. The point is clear. This isn't just a difference in the number of books. It's a difference in the entire story. While the Western world moved forward with a limited canon, Ethiopia preserved entire texts that gradually disappeared elsewhere. But the most interesting part of the story begins, because the question isn't just whether there were these extra books. The real question is, how did they survive? When Europe was going through the Dark Ages, circumstances were very different. Empires were crumbling, wars were raging, libraries were burning, and knowledge was slowly disappearing. Many ancient religious and historical texts were lost forever. But at the same time, in one corner of the world, in Ethiopia, the exact opposite was happening. In monasteries high in the mountains, perched on steep cliffs and difficult to reach, monks quietly engaged in a different work. These places were so remote and isolated that the turmoil of the outside world rarely affected them. Especially when Islamic expansion began to transform North Africa and the Middle East after the 7th century, Ethiopia became isolated. But this isolation became its protection. In these mountain monasteries, monks copied ancient texts by hand, letter by letter. It was no easy task. Each manuscript took months to complete. Sitting under the dim light of oil lamps, they carefully revised every word, ensuring nothing was lost. This work continued, generation after generation. It was through these efforts that some texts were preserved that gradually disappeared elsewhere in the world. These included the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, and the Maccabees. These were not just religious texts, but part of early Christian thought, once considered sacred. Now that we understand why certain texts were preserved in Ethiopia, the next major difference emerges, and that is the image of Christ himself. In Western tradition, Jesus is often portrayed as calm, gentle, and comforting, as a shepherd who cares for his flock, who forgives all, who embodies love and peace. This image was also reinforced in Renaissance art, a light face, soft eyes, a comforting presence. But the image of Christ in the Ethiopian tradition is quite different. Here, he is depicted not merely as a kindly teacher, but as a being possessed of tremendous cosmic power. This is not a soft light, but a burning divine radiance, like a being made of fire itself. The descriptions of his form in these texts are startling. His hair is described as shining like wool, as if sunlight is reflected in it. His eyes appear like fire burning within crystal, possessing both depth and power. His face is described as so radiant that it seems to shine brighter than 1,000 suns. This is not merely a description of beauty, but a sign of a presence before which even angels are silenced. Here, Christ is seen not simply as a teacher or healer, but as a being with authority whose presence influences reality itself. His voice is described as resonant, and his form is not merely human, but cosmic. This is where Mel Gibson's entry into this story begins. In 2004, he made a film, The Passion of the Christ. It wasn't a typical religious film. What made it special was that it wasn't shot in English, but rather in ancient languages like Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew, to make the story as authentic and historical as possible. The film depicted the last 12 hours of Jesus' life in a highly intense and emotional way, from his arrest to his crucifixion. Made on a low budget, the film grossed over $600 million worldwide. It was a huge success at the time, and, most notably, it remained the highest-grossing R-rated film in American history for several years. Despite its immense success, Gibson himself didn't consider it the complete story. And he stated in several interviews that The Passion only tells half the story. According to him, the real story begins after that, the resurrection. For him, the resurrection was not a simple event, but a major turning point that hadn't yet been properly portrayed. With this thought in mind, he continued working on a sequel for a long time. Now, the official name of this new project is The Resurrection of the Christ. Gibson believes this sequel will depict an event that has never been fully portrayed on screen before, and could bring the entire story to a new perspective. Mel Gibson's thinking becomes even more interesting from here. He has clearly stated that his new film will not simply depict the simple story of the resurrection. According to him, the story will not begin directly from the moment Jesus is crucified or rises from the tomb, but rather from much earlier, with the fall of the angels. And this means that the scope of the story will not be limited to earth, but will extend to heaven and the events surrounding it. According to Gibson, the resurrection was not an event of one place or one time. It was a moment that impacted on different levels as if something changed in different dimensions. He said in an interview that to accurately portray this story, one would have to go somewhere else, a place that films don't usually go. And it was in this context that he uttered a line that caught people's attention: "You must go to hell." He meant that to explain this story, one would have to show a journey between heaven, earth, and hell. In Joe Rogan's podcast, Gibson explained that he was working on 2 scripts for the film. One was a traditional, straightforward, and structured story, the kind people typically expect. But the second script was completely different. So he himself jokingly described it as an experience like an acid trip, a journey that transcends ordinary boundaries. In this second version, the story becomes a cosmic journey, where fallen angels, other worlds, and different levels of reality come together. Clearly, Gibson wants to portray the resurrection not just as a historical event, but as a major cosmic shift. Now, interestingly, the kind of story Mel Gibson is talking about is already glimpsed in some ancient texts preserved in Ethiopia, particularly in texts like the Ascension of Isaiah and the Book of Enoch. In these writings, Christ is depicted not just as a teacher walking the earth, but as a being connected to different levels of worlds. The Ascension of Isaiah describes a journey through the various levels of heaven. Christ's descent is not described directly in this story. Rather, it depicts him descending from above through each level, gradually concealing his true divinity to come to earth in human form. Or this suggests that his existence was not confined to a single place, but was interconnected with various levels or dimensions. Similarly, the Book of Enoch mentions heavenly powers, fallen angels, and their influence. These stories reveal a chosen figure who administers justice, upholds law, and confronts evil. This confrontation is not limited to earth, but extends to heaven and its associated dimensions. If these descriptions are considered in conjunction with Gibson's vision, a similarity is evident. He also wants to portray Christ as a character who passes through different levels, encounters fallen angels, and crosses the boundaries between heaven and earth. From this perspective, resurrection becomes not just the resurrection of a body, but an event that breaks the distance between these worlds. This is why Gibson's thinking and the ancient Ethiopian texts seem to have a similarity, as if both offer different glimpses of the same larger story. Book of Enoch shock. Now another shocking part of the story emerges: the Book of Enoch. This is not a later work. Its earliest portions are believed to have been written around 300 BCE, several centuries before the birth of Jesus. And this book repeatedly mentions a mysterious figure called the Son of Man. This is no ordinary human being, but a figure who is described as just, chosen, and possessing divine authority. The description of this Son of Man in chapter 46 of Enoch is very special. There, his head and hair are described as white as wool, and with him is a being whose face is filled with grace and power. Now, if we compare this to the later book of Revelation, especially chapter 1:14, the similarities are striking. Revelation also describes a being with hair as white as wool and eyes as blazing fire. His feet are described as like heated bronze, and his voice sounds like roaring waters. Furthermore, the sword-like words that come from his mouth demonstrate his authority. When these two descriptions are juxtaposed, several things appear to be similar. Hair as white as wool, eyes as fiery as bronze, feet as resonant as bronze, a resonant voice, and words full of authority. And this similarity is so striking that it seems difficult to call it a coincidence. And interestingly, the early Christian community was familiar with the Book of Enoch. Enoch is also quoted almost directly in the Epistle of Jude, where the Lord is spoken of as coming with his holy people. Early church scholars, such as Tertullian and Irenaeus, also mentioned Enoch and considered it important. But in the 4th century, when church councils began determining the biblical canon, and the Book of Enoch was removed from the official list. This means that a text once well known and accepted was gradually sidelined. This makes it even more mysterious because it wasn't just an old book, but part of the original thinking that was later decided to be removed. Why it was removed. The biggest question now arises: if books like the Book of Enoch were well known and quoted within the early Christian community, why were they later removed? And the reason wasn't just theological disagreement, it was much deeper than that. The teachings found in these texts were different from the thinking that later became essential for the established institutional order. These writings repeatedly present the idea that humans are not merely frail creatures made of dust or clay, but rather children of light, meaning a divine spark exists within every individual. Along with this, another important idea emerges, that the kingdom of God is not somewhere far away, but within the human being. Salvation is not something obtained through an external system or intermediary, but an inner awakening. That is, salvation does not mean merely grace bestowed by an institution, but rather recognizing the truth within oneself. This is where the problem begins. If divinity already exists within every human being, why would one need a mediator to reach God? If the kingdom is within, the role of external structures diminishes, and if salvation is a process of awakening, it cannot remain under the control of any institution. This idea was challenging for the institutional order. By that time, the religious structure was gradually becoming organized, where rules, rituals, and hierarchies were important. In such a situation, suggesting that every individual could discover truth within themselves could have weakened that system of control. Therefore, ideas that advocated a direct connection between the individual and the divine were gradually sidelined. This decision was not merely a matter of doctrine, but also a matter of maintaining order. Thus, certain texts were excluded, not because they were completely alien, but because their teachings pointed in a direction where the role of the institution was diminished. Now, a deeper issue related to this emerges, and that is the true identity of the human being. In some ancient Ethiopian texts, a teaching related to Christ appears repeatedly. You are not dust, but light. This may sound like a simple spiritual line, but its significance is profound. Western theology often emphasizes humanity's fallen nature, that is, that humans are fundamentally weak, sinful, or incomplete, in need of external help. In this view, salvation is a gift that comes from above, through some provision, grace, or external intervention. But some teachings found in the Ethiopian tradition offer a different perspective. Here, humans are not simply made of clay, but are connected to light. And this means that every person already possesses a divine element within them, a spark that not only sustains them, but also gives them meaning. In this view, salvation is not an external reward, but an inner realization, as one realizes who they are and where they belong. Therefore, salvation is understood as a process of awakening, as one gradually recognizes their true nature. Now, another ancient text further clarifies this picture, the Ascension of Isaiah. It describes a unique journey in which the prophet Isaiah travels through the 7 heavens. This isn't a simple up-and-down story. Instead, each level is described as a separate world unto itself. The heavens depicted in this journey aren't made of stone or brick. They're depicted as composed of light and energy, as if the structures there are not solid objects, but of radiance and vibration. In some places, it seems as if the entire atmosphere is alive, where everything moves like a flow of energy. Different levels of angels are also visible, with different responsibilities at each level. At the first levels, angels are found who deal with earthly matters. As one ascends, these levels become more powerful and radiant. The higher the level, the deeper the light, and the more diverse the system. This paints a picture of a system in which each level has its own role. This same text also describes the descent of Christ, but not directly. It explains that when he descends from above, he does not come in his full glory. Rather, he gradually conceals his divinity as he passes through each level, allowing the world below to tolerate him. His radiance is very bright in the upper levels, but as he descends, this light diminishes. In each heaven, he assumes a form corresponding to the beings there so that he can be recognized. This is not a loss of power, but a deliberate limitation of it. When he finally appears on earth as a child in Bethlehem, his true cosmic form is not visible. Outwardly, he appears completely human, while his essential nature remains hidden. This idea bears an interesting resemblance to the kind of story Mel Gibson has been alluding to, where Christ passes through different levels, crossing the boundaries between heaven and earth. Here, too, the story isn't limited to the earthly realm, but connects multiple levels of reality. And the story now reaches a major turning point in the 4th century. Before then, Christianity was a diffuse, isolated faith lived out in communities, small groups each understanding and practicing its own unique ways. But when Christianity gained official support under the Roman Emperor Constantine, things began to change. It was no longer merely a spiritual movement, but rather a structure integral to the empire. When a faith becomes associated with an empire, efforts to unify it also begin. But during this period, various church councils were convened with one primary purpose: to determine which texts would be considered authoritative and which would not. Gradually, a standard list was created, which we know today as the canon. In this process, some older and influential texts were discarded. During the Council of Laodicea in 363 AD, texts like the Book of Enoch were removed from the official list. Similarly, writings that spoke of the divine within man or of direct spiritual experience were gradually suppressed. This shift wasn't simply a matter of religious differences. As Christianity became an organized system, the understanding of salvation also began to conform to that framework. If every individual could connect with God within themselves, the role of institutional guidance could be diminished. Therefore, teachings that showed the path to salvation within a systematic framework were prioritized, and ideas that pointed directly to inner awakening gradually fell by the wayside. The survival and today. Despite so many changes, decisions, and differing traditions, one thing remains remarkable: some things never completely disappeared. While ancient texts have been lost or destroyed over time in many parts of the world, some monks in remote Ethiopia preserved them for centuries. In particular, the manuscripts called the Garama Gospels were preserved in an ancient monastery in the Tigray region. Scholars date them to between 330 and 660 AD, making them among the oldest surviving Christian manuscripts in the world. The uniqueness of these texts lies not only in their age, but also in their preservation. They were kept within the monastery for centuries, not even allowed to be taken outside. The reason was to preserve them in the same form as they were from the beginning. Generation after generation, monks cared for these manuscripts, just as a family preserves its most precious heirloom. This task was not easy, but for them, it was not just a responsibility, but a part of their faith. Today, modern scholars and conservation experts are working on these manuscripts. Efforts are underway to digitally preserve them so that people can view and understand them in the future. This process has also revealed that Ethiopia had a rich tradition of painting and manuscript production at that time. At a time when the conditions for art and writing were declining in many parts of Europe, these traditions were still alive and flourishing in Ethiopia. The image of Christ also emerges from a different perspective in these manuscripts. Here, he is seen not simply as a historical figure, but as the Word through whom the order of creation is maintained. This means that his influence is not limited to events, but is also connected to the very structure that keeps the world in balance. Thus, texts that were preserved in mountain monasteries for centuries are once again becoming a subject of study and understanding. And this shows that while history may have changed greatly, some traditions, with their roots, remain alive. Now comes the question of what lies ahead, because this story isn't just about the past, but also about the future. The film Mel Gibson is working on, The Resurrection of the Christ, is now slated for release in 2027. It won't be a single film, but rather a two-part story, designed to explore the entire subject in detail. The project's budget is reportedly around $100 million, making it one of the most ambitious religious films ever made. Production is underway at Rome's renowned Cinecittà Studios, the same studio where many major historical and epic films have been made before. But what makes this film unique is its approach. Gibson has already hinted that this story won't be told in a traditional way. It will explore not just earthly events, but also broader aspects of the world. For this reason, some believe that audiences may see a Christ image that differs from the one typically depicted in Western art. It's possible that the film will reveal a Christ that has been preserved in Ethiopian traditions, a Christ who is understood not just as a quiet teacher, but as a pervasive and influential presence. If this happens, it will not only be a cinematic shift, but could also transform the way audiences view Christ. This is why there is as much curiosity as discussion surrounding this film. And now, the ultimate question arises. If history has concealed a different image of Christ for so long, was this the only thing that was suppressed? Or were there other traditions, ideas, and stories that were left behind over time? History doesn't always run straight. Often, what is visible isn't the whole story, but only a part of it. Different traditions survive in different places, and over time, some voices become stronger, while others fade. And if understandings of Christ have existed in different forms, it's natural to think that there may have been other aspects that haven't been incorporated into the common understanding. Perhaps some ideas were ahead of their time, or the way they were understood has changed. Today, as old texts are being revisited and new technologies are making them safe and understandable, this question becomes even more important. Are we getting closer to the full story? Maybe some things disappeared not just because they were wrong, but because they were different. And it's also possible that today's world is more ready than ever to see them from a new perspective. Perhaps the time has come to understand those parts of history that have long been sidelined. And maybe the world is now ready to see the bigger picture, which was previously difficult to understand. If you enjoy such mysterious and thought-provoking stories, to subscribe to the channel now to be the first to know about every new revelation and never miss a thing.